Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. If you'd like to join our writing community on Discord and get access to fantasy writing classes and books on Patreon, check the links in the description. And if you don't want to miss any future episodes, be sure to follow or subscribe. And to support the show, leave a quick rating on Spotify or iTunes and share this episode on social media or with anyone who you think may be interested. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the show. I'm thrilled to welcome to the Toolshed best-selling author Sarah Arthur. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, thank you for giving up your time to join me, especially we having a new book on the horizon, and it's your debut YA novel as well,
It
Once a
is.
Queen.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Um,
the I understand it's the first in a fantasy trilogy. It's going to be published by Waterbrook, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House, which is very, very exciting.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
I'm kind of pinching myself because I feel like it's been a dream for a long time, since I was little, actually, to write fiction. And after 12 nonfiction books, it's kind of a big transition to something different.
yeah.
But really back to my first love. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. So we're going to talk all about that today, as well as writing YA fantasy fiction more generally, which is becoming more and more popular. We're also going to chat about crossing over from non-fiction to fiction. I know it's we've had quite a few questions in the past about writing, coming from that non-fiction background and making a move, because one of your best-selling books, isn't it, is Walking with Frodo. It is a devotional
Yes.
journey through Lord of the Rings. It sounds amazing.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean that goes back a long way, as you can imagine. So I had been in working in church settings here in the United States as a youth worker. So working with students grades 6 through 12. So that's, those are all secondary, basically secondary grades here. And having like my instincts as a having been an English major were to talk about stories, right? And just like dig into themes and relate them to our faith and looking at spiritual themes and literature, which is just, it's just what I do. And so I would do small groups like where we would read The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. And so when The Lord of the Rings was in theaters, it was for me as a youth worker slash former English major, it was like the perfect marriage of all of my favorite things. And and I was like, did you know Tolkien was a Catholic? And like in
Yeah.
his letters, he says this about, like his faith is infused through all of it, right? It's an act of worship for him. It's just fascinating stuff. And I wanted my students to hear about it.
Yeah.
But when the publisher picked up that idea, it was like, this is fantastic, right? Like you can't,
Nice.
you get to knock it out of the park at that point.
Yeah.
Um, it was a super fun book and it did really well. And that really launched my writing career. And ever since, like most of my nonfiction books have been about the intersection of faith and great stories, poetry and fiction of other authors throughout the centuries. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. And you
Yeah.
said you got into fiction before you started nonfiction. So tell us a bit about how you started writing in those early days and sort of what challenges you encountered.
I mean, like all the way back to when I was 6 and wanted to be a writer. Like, how far back do we want to go? Right. I think for most people who love stories and storytelling, it starts when you're a small child and you're holding a book in your hands, right? And you have an experience of reading that happens to you the same way that the big storm of snow is coming here in Michigan that's about to happen to us. Like we remember some of those moments of an amazing story the same way we remember a phone call about a tragedy or, you know, uh, something that happened in our family history. Like it happened to us, and I think that is the beginning for me.
Yeah.
Um, and scribbling stories. And as a kid, you're just doing reps and you think it's all fun and games and it's wonderful, which it is. But turns out it's also a craft that you need to learn.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
um, Yeah. And so one of my favorite quotes from Tolkien in his letters is it is a curse having the epic temperament in an overcrowded age devoted to snappy bits.
Not much has changed.
And because he could never finish anything, right? Like
Yeah,
you read the Silmarillion and there's a million beginnings to the history of Middle Earth, or to like, I'm going to tell the story from the elves side of things and the from
yeah,
men side of things, and Melchior. Like I, I think I think writing fiction is just a continuation of what is at the soul of my formation from
yeah,
childhood. But I have had to learn how to do it better. You know, that's I think the significant thing. I read my
yeah,
own stories. Have you ever read a story you wrote, you know, a while ago and you're like, oh no. Mm-mm.
yeah. Well, I like to be honest, if I read over something that I wrote yesterday, I'll be like, bloody hell, did I write this? And I think that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bit unnerving, but if you're looking back at something and thinking I can do better than that, then you've got that sort of mindset of growth and improvement, and I think that's always a
Yeah.
good thing. You need that as a writer. I think the moments you become content is the moment you should start getting worried, unless
Mm-mm.
you've sold millions of books, of course. But
Yeah. I mean, at that point, like, what are you? You're like a genre writer and you just have a formula and you just repeat it over and over and over again. Um, God forbid that as ever what I
you catch
what I
yourself now.
Mhm. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Not a genre. We are talking about fantasy, right? Which has its own kind of formula and there are expectations, as is young adult literature. Same thing. So,
Yeah.
mm,
Definitely.
mhm.
So tell us about Once a Queen. How did it all lead to this? Because I understand you started it a while ago.
I did. I mean, 20 years ago, I remember having the initial idea for what if there was a young American teenager who goes over to England and meets her British grandmother for the first time. And there's some mystery about why the estrangement, right, between her mother and her grandmother. Why have they never met before? Um, and as she's at her grandmother's estate, because of course it's an estate, um, she's beginning to realize that like something's not right, not only with her grandmother's kind of overall mental health, maybe is a good way to put it, but um, kind of magical realism kinds of things are happening. And so
Yeah.
she's beginning to question if the fairy tales she heard as a child that she thinks she has to give up as she becomes a grown up, if they're maybe actually true, and if
Yeah.
her grandmother is maybe connected to those fairy tales somehow.
Oh, really cool.
Yeah, it was
I've
fun.
been reading some and I have been really
Yeah.
enjoying exploring this mysterious grand house. All the
Yes.
locked doors. And it sort of takes you back to that to being a kid and having that curiosity and wanting to know what is over there and what's behind
Yeah. Well, and what is wrong with all these grown-ups? Um,
that.
yeah. So, and or maybe this is just how grown-ups are, right? Like it's, uh, I think part of growing up, and my character Eva is 14. And so part of growing up for her is like, is this just how grown-ups are, or is something not right? Um, and she begins to kind of take that on herself. And she also begins to internalize it. Like, what am I doing wrong that's making grandmother act this way? Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of kids do that. Grown-ups don't often become vulnerable with children, um, to clue them in on maybe some of the grief and loss that shaped who those grown-ups are now.
Yeah, I
So that's
think
part
it's
of the mystery,
obviously,
right?
yeah. I suppose it's from the adult perspective, it's sort of protectionist. You just don't want to
Yes.
expose them. But from I
Yes.
know from myself, from the kids' perspective, you're perfectly capable of understanding things, and you find it patronizing and belittling,
Mm-hmm.
and that is frustrating for a youngster.
Yeah, absolutely. I've used this example before in other contexts in stuff that I've written, but it's sort of, well, I have two sons. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old now. And right now, my 13-year-old and my 10-year-old too, I can trust them to pour milk from a gallon. Like here in the US, we do these monster things of milk. This is a whole
Yeah.
gallon. But when they're little, like if they tried to pour that milk into their cereal, I could just, I mean, like I knew what was coming, right? They'd be
Yeah.
overpowered and the whole thing would over, just go everywhere. And so there's this tension, even as a writer for young adults, of like, what are they old enough to bear?
Yeah.
And at what point can they bear it? And I know, the adults in Eva's life are trying to protect her. Like you said,
Yeah.
they're trying to give her only as much as she can bear. But at 14, she's like, come on.
Bring it on. But you don't really know. You're untested at that age, aren't you? You don't really know. I suppose
You want to
that's,
unlock all those
yeah.
doors. You want to see what's behind the curtain. Yeah.
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 So it's focused on Eva, and it does. You do a brilliant job. Like I was connected with her straight away, and I carried on reading just to find out what was going to happen next because you had that connection with her. So
Mm.
how did you approach the creation of Eva and her development as the story went on?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, I think that I have this weird ability to remember what it was like to be a teenager. And I think some of that is because for a long, long time since college, I've worked with teenagers. So
Yeah.
I worked in religious settings as a youth director with, grades 6 through 12 here in the US. Um, Worked in various different ministry settings, like I worked at camps as a camp counselor and that kind of thing. And now and I've volunteered also for a long, long time. And now I am a substitute teacher in urban public middle schools here in the state capital of Michigan. So like I'm dealing with kids all the time. I have a 13-year-old now, and a lot of it was just remembering and observing.
Yeah.
Um, and also I mean, Eva, the many more layers of like revisions I would do, she would become richer and richer character. And that's so much, and thanks to the people who were beta readers that gave me feedback on her.
Yeah.
Friends of mine who have written books who helped me understand like basic stuff about fiction that I thought I knew instinctively, but like once you get a handle on the craft of it, you're like, oh, that's what the really good writers are doing. And I didn't even notice. For instance, the emotional valence of a chapter at the beginning needs to change by the end. If she's
Mm.
anxious, by the end, she needs to feel better or be more anxious. If at the beginning she feels awesome, her relationship with her grandmother is fantastic, by the end, it's got to be like even better. Like you want to know, like, is it going to be like this till the rest of the book, or it needs to have hit the bottom, right? Like
Yeah.
you,
Peaks and
you're,
troughs almost.
yeah, and that's not just a like you hook the reader kind of thing, but it's really adolescence in a nutshell.
Yeah, you're up and down, hormones.
Oh, 100%, because you're still learning who you are as a person with emotions, and hormones aren't helping, and you're everywhere, right? So that was actually really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And there's a really interesting magic aspect to it,
Hmm.
isn't it, with the portals and stuff like that? Can you tell us about that? How you
Hmm.
came up with that side of it?
I'm addicted to portal fantasy, and it goes in and out of popularity in the fantasy world. But for me, magical realism, where the worlds beyond ours are breaking in on this one,
Yeah,
that is really fascinating to me. So as you read the book, you'll see elements of like the Secret Garden in there, right? Which itself has some magical realism with creation and how it speaks to the characters and life kind of being always um, happening and like but I wanted those portals to be very evocative of stories that we grew up reading. Very E. Nesbit, Madeline L'Engle in A Wrinkle in Time, C.S. Lewis with Narnia. I didn't want it to just be like Tolkien, where it all takes place in this
yeah,
fantasy world, or at least a reimagined like Europe prior to the remaking of the world. So,
Yeah.
and the Age of Men. Um, I really wanted it to be like you could literally be walking down the street and the stop sign could open up and like all of a sudden, like what is that in there?
That's really
And what is
cool.
that thing climbing out of it? Kind of feeling. So yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's awesome. And obviously it's a YA and it's become
Mm,
so popular, hasn't it? Especially like romance sides. And like it's probably
mhm.
it's always been around, hasn't it, with like Twilight and things. But it
Yeah,
seems
yeah.
in and when you especially speak to agents and editors, that's all they really want. So and I think it's because it's driven and fueled a lot by this brilliant readership, which
Mm,
seems to
mm,
be thriving on places like TikTok and
yeah,
Instagram, and you can make an author's career overnight, it seems.
yeah,
And
yeah. Which is
so,
terrifying, right? It's like how, but
yeah. So,
mm,
how do you've obviously drawn to it. How do you approach it? If anyone out there wants to write YA, what would
mm.
you say is the most important things to keep in mind?
Well, probably the most important thing that I have heard along the way from people who are in who are talking about the publishing world and like reflecting thoughtfully on it. Sarah Mackenzie from the Read Aloud Revival here in the U.S. is one that that has she coined the idea of YA as a genre. And
Hmm.
maybe she didn't coin it, but heard it from somebody, but she's kind of taken that and run with it. And I think that's really insightful. It's not just an age level,
Yeah.
it's a genre. So it has certain expectations with it. And here in
Yeah.
the US, at least, the expectations are it's issues driven. So right now, if it's about, oh, excuse me, issues of like racism and gender or climate change or you name it, it's a hot topic that young people are thinking and talking about. Um, then it's that drives the narrative, that drives the kinds of books that are getting picked up um, and um, and romance and sexuality is a big part of that, and it's much more like edgy. The characters are doing much more experimental things with stuff that's maybe not legal or maybe not recommended.
Yeah.
Which is a trope for adolescents, right? Like the trope is that all adolescents are experimenting with stuff they're not supposed to be.
Yeah.
When in my studies in seminary about in graduate school about adolescence, it's actually most behaviors that adolescents engage in that are maybe antisocial or at risk are actually behaviors invented by grown-ups.
Mm.
Um, so I think it's a trope and I think it's an expectation that's maybe not necessarily the case for all kids.
Yeah.
Um, but for this story, the history of it, and it's in my conversations with publishing houses about it. At some points, they'd be like, "We can't tell if this is middle grade, like younger, like ages 8 to 12, like more habit-ish, like a primary source, like, or is it like a what is this? Like, because it's not issues driven. It's a multi-generational family story
Yeah.
with fantasy and fairy tale elements." Because I am most interested in Eva and her grandmother. Like that is my primary interest. She has, I mean, Frankie's in there as a good friend, hers who's her age, and that relationship develops, but it not in a YA kind of way.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that the area I write in is the most interesting to me with a main character who's 14. She's a young teen. It's not YA, but it's also not middle grade.
Yeah.
So, and I'm grateful to have a publisher who saw the potential of that because that is kind of an empty space in
It is.
between
Yeah.
these two genres, right? Where a 14-year-old is not ready necessarily to be experimenting with drugs and may never have any interest with that, but they can't figure out why the blank their adults around them are acting this way. And is
Yeah.
this what I can expect as I turn my face to adulthood? Um, so that's kind of the space I inhabit.
I like the relationship that you explored as well between grandparents and grandchild. Like I had really close relationships with my grandmothers. And I love the perspective of the older person. Like again,
Mm,
it's not really feature, so it's really refreshing to see that relationship.
mm,
Um, but it's not. I suppose it's like a sort of bit like the mentor figure, isn't it? But I think you did it in like a really refreshing way because you've got that closer familial relationship.
mm, mm.
Um, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
how did you find writing the sort of dynamics between the two of them?
Yeah. Well, there's a author Q&A in the back of the book where I give a little background on my own relationship with my maternal grandmother who died when I was 14. Um, and um, and realizing it over time that she had had a lot of trauma as a young person and how that affected her sense of security in an unsafe world universe, right? Like at any point you could be hit with something traumatizing, and that really um, made it difficult for her to trust and to be open and vulnerable. But at the same time, she was wonderfully loving to me as a child. And I remember her singing Frere Jacques to me because she had studied French. And um, but observing my own mom's journey and taking care of her as she was diagnosed with cancer and dying as a 14-year-old, it was it was really powerful and interesting, and sad and hard
Yeah,
um and you know I also like teenagers and young adults, like this is when grandparents are aging and this is when they can, we can start to lose them, right? Or
yeah.
even
It could
in our
usually it's
20s.
like your first experience of like significant loss.
Yeah. And that's real. That's real. um, it doesn't matter, that it's not, it, it doesn't matter. You might not be super close to your grandparents, but your parent is grieving, right? And
Yeah,
that affects you. So it's complicated. And it's a season in life when that's becoming like real to you in ways that maybe it wasn't before.
yeah. And it's great that you get the genre to explore these themes with. And I know that's something that you wanted to do in this book.
Hmm.
Yeah. So how did you weave that into your story?
Um, well, yeah, over 20 years, the story began to teach me what it was about, right? I didn't set out to write a story about a girl, a 14-year-old who um was basically like exploring the same kinds of dynamics in a relationship with a grandparent, like like that I had experienced. So that kind of wove itself in. Um, and I think that so 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was diagnosed with breast cancer when my sons were 4 and 7, which is super young. I mean, it was
Yeah. I'm so sorry to
so
hear.
young. And I I really had a moment where I was like, I've got to finish this book because it's like the book of my heart, and if I don't,
Yeah.
it'll. And so I think that is really the moment when Eva's relationship with her grandmother, like I understood the stakes, right? Like it wasn't just a story anymore.
Yeah.
Um, it was about a young person potentially, like their sense of what can be lost, right, in
Yeah.
these relationships. And also recognizing that like we are that we don't get to tell the last chapter, like we don't get to invent the story of our lives in the way that we would want them to go.
Yeah.
And nor can we manipulate people. We can't tell other people's story. Like I couldn't like manhandle my grandmother into being like, you can trust people, you can love them, like you don't
Yeah.
have to let go of faith or whatever, before you, like, you can reclaim all that before you die. But what if they don't? Right? Like, how do we sit with people in their pain,
Yeah.
and still love them? And I think that the poignant aspect of what people are telling me about the book, that's the season when that began to be expressed in the story because we were
Yeah.
living it. And
Yeah.
I'm, as far as we know, cancer free now,
Oh,
um,
amazing. Great
which
news.
is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
universe, for good. Really blessed with great healthcare in this specific circumstance. But it affects more and more families, right? And there is, it does show up in my book as well as a kind
Yeah.
of shattering diagnosis. So not too many spoilers, but that was real for us.
Did you find it quite therapeutic writing the story then, having been through this? 'Cause I
Mm-hmm.
do find writing really therapeutic sometimes, and especially if I've got something that's playing on my mind, you could end up just starting a random story, but it's sort of you having a conversation with yourself about what is troubling you. And did you
Yeah.
ever find that aspect quite helpful?
I have. I'm not sure I'd say it about this story so
Yeah,
much. Because I was so, for me, Eva was the focus. Like I didn't want my experience of a diagnosis, my own diagnosis, to eclipse her journey. So I think I was, and so I was maybe trying to protect her a little bit, but also make it, I didn't want her journey to be robbed of its uniqueness. Like I wanted this to be Eva. Um, while like making it as realistic as possible. Um, when you get to the final like fifth or sixth of the book, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
yeah.
But what did happen when I was supposed to be writing that is I had the idea for another story. It was a story for grown-ups, where there was a woman who is um she shows up at the cancer center for her 6 months checkup and sees a friend who ditched her when she was diagnosed with cancer, who was just like, praying for you, but never, and realizes that that person has just gotten a diagnosis. And so I was like, I had a lot of rage. Um, like when I was facing cancer, it was like my response to grief is to get just really ticked off.
Yeah,
Um, and so that book was good, therapeutic. It's not, it's mostly just first chapters right now, but
yeah.
um, I was preserving Eva from grown-up rage, that my sons would have to have this as one of their earliest memories, right?
Yeah.
It made me mad. So I just channeled it all into this other story.
Yeah. Oh, well, it comes out on the 30th of January.
Mm.
That's right, it's the 30th of January, not far
Yes,
away
it
at
does.
all.
Can't believe it. It's
Um,
pub month.
yeah, I know, book day soon.
Hmm.
How did you find the process of getting it published? Was that a tough one, a long one? What was your experience of it all?
It was, there were moments of like agony and moments of serendipity, which is what is like basically publishing in a nutshell, I think, for a lot of us. It's like you can do all the right things and nothing
Yeah,
happens. And then you can just have a random conversation at with a random person, and all of a sudden the next steps in the future are wide open.
yeah,
So yeah, I something I understood about the transition from nonfiction to fiction is I needed an agent. So I had done all of my own, um, I had pitches and everything for nonfiction. Because I was working with smaller publishers, and that works.
yeah,
Fiction does not work that way, especially the bigger New York houses like Penguin Random House, HarperCollins. Um, they Agents are key. And so after all those years of doing my own stuff, I had to get an agent, and that was really hard. Um, but then my current agent, this is a crazy story. It would take forever to tell. So I'm just going to say she read my books for teenagers as a teenager, went off to school to get into publishing, started to work for an agent, found out I wanted an agent, and was like, I would love to. I didn't know you were writing fiction. Let me look at your stuff. And then
nice.
signed me. So
Oh, amazing.
it
Playing a long
is.
game there.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of my friends was like, it's like you custom designed an agent for yourself.
Yeah.
So
Grow
I
your own
can't, like,
agents.
no story I could tell you would be like replicable for anyone listening.
There you go. It's a good strategy,
Other
though.
than the long game, like
Yeah, well,
they
sometimes
do have
it might be quicker actually because it takes that long for agents to get back to you. Might be be
yeah,
quicker
yeah.
to do what you
And
did.
then my editor is somebody I knew from a previous publishing house when I was doing nonfiction. So again, the long game, right? Like people don't
Yeah,
always stay in the roles that they're in, nor with the same publisher. And so she ended up at this publishing house, reached out when she found out I had an agent. She knew I was writing this story because she
nice.
had early drafts of it and was like, I want to look at what she's got. So again, um, we want it all to happen right away. I wanted fiction to happen right away.
Yeah,
But 20 years later, here is the dream, right? Happening. And all along the way, it's a story of opening my fists and letting go of how I think this is supposed to happen and being in it for the long game.
yeah. I think that's what you got to get used to. It's a marathon, isn't it? Not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so we mentioned, fiction. Um, it's a really I was checking some of the books out, and obviously, the Lord of the Rings one drew my eye. There's a
Yeah.
big
Yep.
poster
Yep.
behind
As I
me.
see, Rohan,
Yeah.
yes,
Anyone
absolutely.
listening, I've got a big Rohan poster behind me. But it's
Hmm.
yeah, it's tricky. I know when I used to be a lawyer, and when I started writing fiction, I found it really tough to almost find your voice because you've sort of been conditioned to write in a sort of rigid, very formal
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
And it took years, a lot of practice. And I know that a lot of other writers who've come from sort of professional background and they're trying to do more fiction writing, they've encountered that as well. So how did you encounter that as well, first and foremost? Because I know you've written fiction before you started nonfiction. And if you
Oh, I
did,
wrote
how
terrible fiction. Terrible. But yes.
yeah. And how did you overcome any challenges that you encountered?
I'm not even sure I have overcome them, to be honest. They're in my face every day because I'm writing book 2 in the series now, Once
Oh,
a Castle,
nice.
which is supposed to come out next year sometime. So it's like I'm up against it every minute of every day. But yeah, so it's that the change of style is a really big one. And I would say like I wasn't writing briefs. I was allowed to, there was a creative element to a lot of my nonfiction. But I have a super strong first person essay voice that I've honed over time, over 20 years. And it's really good. Like I'm really
Yeah.
good at it and it comes really easily and I feel really confident. Fiction is not that for me. I feel like a total poser. I feel like there's so many amazing authors who came before me. Like, why? I walk into a bookstore and I'm like, okay, forget it. Like, why? The world does not need another book, much less
Yeah.
from me. I think that is the biggest change is that before with nonfiction, I was like, trapeze artist who could just like effortlessly jump from one thing to another. And like with fiction, I look down and I'm like, is there a safety net? I can't see a safe. Like, I don't know what
Yeah.
I'm doing. Will this hold? Like, will they catch me? Um, and I think there's a kind of cruelty in the review world for fiction that there isn't
Yeah.
maybe in nonfiction that makes me really anxious and nervous. Like you either get what I'm doing or I'm the worst author you've ever read in your life. So it's like
Oh,
in
some people
nonfiction,
just
we're
don't
like,
get it. That's the thing.
yeah,
That's
like
what
in
happened.
nonfiction, it's like this book wasn't for me. In fiction, it's
Yeah.
like just burn the book now, save the money, don't bother.
I know.
No.
The other ones I hate the most is like, oh, I couldn't put this down, read it in one sitting, 3 stars. I was like,
Yeah, yeah,
if you read a book in one go, you know what I mean? I think that's pretty impressive. It should be more than 3 stars, maybe. But
yeah. It's
I don't
wild.
know.
It's wild to me. Or they'll be like, I loved this book so much. It was so great. And they give it 3 stars. And you're like,
Yeah.
do not maybe understand how this works. You're not comparing it to like,
I know. Well, there's
crime and
something we need to be
punishment. Like,
aware of now. Like, this is something that I've not really discussed on the podcast, but I did
mm,
chat
mm,
about it in an event recently. And
mhm.
I see what you think about this because you're going into book promo time.
Oh,
So I
it's been
think,
book launch time for 6 months.
yeah,
It's so hard to write book two while I'm also
yeah. But
trying
this
to
is
launch.
something to be aware of, and especially something to pass on to any publishers. If you're working with certain book tour companies, I don't know, I won't say any names, but just be careful. What I've found now in this age of AI is that we've got a lot of book tour companies making fake profiles and then
Yes.
just getting rewrites of existing reviews, charging writers what $100+ for a book promotion and review service,
Right.
and all you're getting is fake Goodreads profiles
Yep.
with AI
Yep.
generated reviews.
Yep.
So be careful.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reveal a lot more about it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we need to watch out for, especially if you're spending money on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you encountered anything like that so far in your promotions or?
Yeah, I don't I don't know if it's the difference between a larger traditional
Yeah.
publishing
You've
house
got
that
the network, haven't
has
you?
a mechanism
Yeah.
for marketing and publicity, but as an author, you should not be paying for any of that.
Yeah.
That comes with the agreement with the publishing house. That is, you are working together on
Definitely.
those things. There should not be add-ons for those
Yeah.
things. I've had lots of people asking me those questions because if they've self-published or if they've done a hybrid publishing kind of situation, there are all these add-ons, right? Like we'll get your stuff reviewed and blah, blah, blah for X number of dollars. No, no. Um,
Yeah.
Unless you hire a publicist
Yeah.
who has known track record. Um, and that's, you know, that takes researching. That's you. They don't come
Does.
to you.
Yeah.
Those people don't come to you. You find them. And they should be, vetted and certified and all
Yeah.
that.
To be honest, I did use one of the publicists that I did use was using AI, and
Mm, mm,
they did have like they look pretty legit and stuff like that, but there wasn't any sort of, like you've got like review sites like Trustpilot. There's no independent reviews, so you're always taking that stab in the dark, and
yeah. Yeah.
that's the thing. You've got to look. It's
It's
really hard, but I was at the same time I was using it as a bit of an experiment to see what was
mhm.
going on with these sort of book tour companies and
Yeah.
PR agents
Yeah.
and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like the publishers are they they do a lot, but they don't do everything. Like the author is still expected to do a
yeah,
lot. Um, I am, it's really unusual unless you're like John Grisham or something to have book tours booked for you by your publisher. Like I am also like, hi, I've made relationships with bookstores for 20 years. Like I can reach out to events coordinators and be like, I'll be in your area. Could I come to you or your library or whatever is going on? And so some of it is figuring out your own bandwidth for what you can and can't do. Like at a certain point, I realized like I'm not a blogger. I
yeah,
don't blog. I don't give away my words for free.
yeah,
so,
yeah,
so no, I'm not going to do that. And so you have to figure out like what are you going to zero in on? What parts of the expectations from the publisher can you and can't you do? And the and you should not be shelling out your own dollars for stuff. Um, you really shouldn't. Um, that's a team effort with the publishing company, but they should be taking on the financial risk of those things. And they really should have the outlets and the access that you don't anyway,
yeah,
right? So that's part of why you sign with them.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the structure.
Yeah, yeah, it's all
Yeah,
built into what they do. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's really hard.
It
I
was
will say
really
that
interesting. Yeah,
I researched what there's like a database of books that were used to train AI, and one of
yeah.
mine is in there.
Oh, really? Yeah,
It's it's so gross and so awful. And like, what can you do?
I
Like
know.
I'm the Writers Guild or Authors Guild of in the US is working on some of that
Yeah.
for
I
all
know it
authors.
scrapes all the websites, so my website was involved as well. It's like
Mhm.
it is it's sort of complete violation. I know it
Oh, oh,
you put your
outrageous.
stuff out you put your stuff out there, but you
Hmm.
don't consent for it to be used in that way. It is massive
Oh,
copyright infringements, like so.
yeah, yep,
Hopefully something will be done, but I don't think anyone wants to. I know I don't think anyone knows how.
yeah. I am glad. I will say I am glad that AI is smarter because my stuff was in there. I'm just kidding. Um, I've elevated the level of
Yeah,
conversation.
you've contributed to the
No, it just feels gross all the way
yeah.
around.
I know. It doesn't seem to be slowing down as well. It just seems to be getting more sophisticated, better capabilities. Like my brother's a full-time YouTuber. He came into me last night and said, "Oh yeah, there's this new AI tool now that can make YouTube videos and
Oh, lovely.
nice." So that'll put me
Yeah.
off of it.
Yeah.
Well, I work in digital marketing as well, so writing,
Mm.
copywriting as a profession has taken a massive whack. Unless you're
Yeah.
doing like really technical high level sort of medical legal stuff that you
Mm.
need like qualifications to understand the content then
Right, right. Yeah, and
but
fair use law in the US is so slippery. It's so not well defined and like there were moments where I would like hyperventilate and be like, are we going to get sued because Frodo is in the title? And I'm like, no, 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 no. You can talk about a work of literature. You really can. Like you can. I wasn't like doing fan fiction where I was like taking the idea and making it mine. So, but I still like periodically wake up in a cold sweat and be like, no, no, we're pulling out. No more Frodo. No, we're done. We're done.
yeah
So
it's understandable though because I
oh,
tell you what they love a lawsuit the Tolkien estate. I remember
oh,
they
oh,
sued someone
oh,
this
yeah.
recycling company in England called Lord of the Bins.
It's so great.
Yeah,
Those poor people. Why? Why? Yeah, and it's terrifying actually. But something I think, if we think about the long game, like we've talked about already, I just feel like it's really important for me to have integrity in my own work and know that my work has its own internal um it's not sacred, but it's original to
yeah,
me. And it may have elements of all of these other fantasy and fairy tales in them. I mean, as you're reading it, you're like, oh, that's so E. Nesbit or whatever. But the same when we read C.S. Lewis, we're like, oh, that's so Hans Christian Andersen, or even that, he's so E. Nesbit there, because we cannot escape from the influence of these authors on the landscape of our imagination, of the way that we understand how stories are told, and that it's fun to put them in conversation with each other and with our contemporary age and see what happens, right? Like without it becoming, it's part tribute and part like ongoing conversation.
yeah,
Um, without crossing lines into, oh, that's clearly somebody else's character that I'm taking. It's not, um, you know, so like how do we, and when we're creating work that outlasts us, I can kind of give or take AI, right? Like this is for me and my kids, my own
yeah.
children, right?
Yeah, I think I don't feel like it's ever going to replace human creativity.
Oh,
What
we're
I
married.
worry
Yeah.
about is like there's a famous book marketer that I follow. He's a successful author as well. And before Christmas, he started advertising this author program, which was
Mm,
all centered around using AI to help. Now, I don't mind using if you're using it as like a prompt or something like
mhm.
that. I could draw the line at getting AI to write stuff for you, and that
Yeah.
was what he
Yeah.
was promoting. And ironically, he said, "Oh yeah, you can get it to write entire scenes for you, so that you can free up time to do the thing that you love, which is
What,
writing."
what, what, what?
And I was
I'm
like,
sorry,
"What
what?
the hell?"
But the writing is what you love. Like
Exactly.
that's
But you're
Yeah.
getting a machine to do it for you. What the hell? That's not writing.
Right.
It's
I
and
wonder, that's so interesting. Like, I wonder if, like, with the invention of like type, right? If there were handwriting
yeah,
people,
that's
like,
not writing.
how
Like I
can
love
you
handwriting, but
allow that machine to do your work for you?
I know.
But that's the mechanics of it. It's the creative process that has been short circuited, and that it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, to be
I
honest with you,
know.
because we are made to create things. I mean, this is straight up Tolkien, right? Like, we are made in the image of a maker. And I'm saying that as a person of faith. Not everybody would agree with it, but you can't argue with the fact that the creative process has a kind of a mind of its own and a life.
Yeah,
Your characters are
does.
going to do stuff that you did not intend. Um, and there's kind of a life there that's hard to explain. And it doesn't go away from generation to generation. That creativity will always be there, that desire to make things. Um, and so it'll be interesting to see, yeah, to see how it,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the copyright issue, like you mentioned before, that's going to be a major one because if you
Hmm.
use like an AI generated image for a book cover, you can't copyright that image. And likewise, if authors are starting to use AI, you, even just passages of the book,
Yeah,
do
yeah,
they then surrender the whole copyright? Is it
yeah,
all like
right.
you?
Yeah.
It's
Ugh.
massively uncertain, and I would just steer clear from just from like an ethical point of view that you can't really
Mhm.
call yourself a
Mhm.
writer if you're getting a machine to write for you, unless
Yeah.
you've got some
Yeah.
kind of impairment, which is totally understandable. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. Like, what would Tolkien say is just all I know. It's like
I
amazing.
know
A man who invented languages while he was in the
we
trenches.
should.
And one, like, what? No, like, no,
We'll have to
no.
make an AI model of Tolkien and ask
Yeah, right. There we go.
him.
In his actual voice, like from the
Yeah.
word, in his actual,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Oh,
Sarah, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting with you. We
oh my
covered a
gosh.
lot of
Yeah.
ground.
Wow.
And I
Well,
know,
and I could see how you could totally break this into a two-parter too. Like, all about what we talked about at the beginning, and then we're wading into AI. I'm sure it's not a conversation that's over either. And I
oh,
can't
definitely,
wait to
yeah.
hear what you're,
I think I
yeah.
might make it a staple question this year because it is such a big
Mm,
thing. Every interview, I'm going to ask what you think about AI because I'm
yeah,
doing
yeah.
a survey at the minute as we're going into this new year.
Mm,
Just so anyone who wants to do it, it could be a beginner writer, it could be a
yeah.
writer well into the career, just to
Mm,
see have they been affected by AI.
yeah,
Like you
yeah.
say, you've been affected because your book has been used as part of the
Mm,
modeling.
yep,
Um,
yep.
and it's just to get a bit of an insight because I don't know, I've chat to a lot of writer friends in the community and everyone just feels a bit helpless. Um,
Yeah, and then don't talk to professors of writing either, unless you want to go down an entire, like, they are up against like, imagine grading papers right now
oh my
and
God.
wondering, like, did this student, is this actually their work?
Yeah.
And also wondering, like, what's the point? When a provost, this literally was on a conversation with some friends of mine who are in higher education, where they were like, yeah, I was at a meeting recently where a provost said, well, maybe with AI in the mix, we won't have to teach writing anymore. And the keynote speaker after that said, the day we stop teaching writing is the day I die.
Yeah. Oh, it is scary, isn't it? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So
Yep.
Sarah, if anyone wants to find out more about you, what's the best place to look? Where
Yes.
should we go?
Yep. I've put everything at saraharthur.com in as clean a way as possible. You can get from there to even to like pre-order information about the book and all the perks that my publisher is offering. And that's Sarah with an H.
Lovely. And Once a Queen is out on the 30th of January. Check it out. Link will be in the description. Sarah, thank you very much again. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Lovely. So honored to be with you. Thank
Uh,
you.
and thank you everyone for listening.